Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and this talk on European perspectives on the current situation in the DPRK with Dr. Berhnard Seliger, who I'll introduce in just a moment. This event was organized by the Center's North Korea International Documentation Project and the Asia program directed by Bob Hathaway, who I saw in the back there. My name is James Person. I run the North Korea International Documentation Project, or NKIDP as we call it, which is overseen by Dr. Christian Ostermann, who is director of the History and Public Policy Program. He is presently in London for meetings and can't join us, unfortunately. Now, NKIDP strives to broaden the discussion on policy toward North Korea by providing a broader historical perspective to the debate based on newly obtained documents from the archives of North Korea's former communist allies. We also try to provide fresh perspectives on the DPRK at our events. We're doing this in keeping with the Wilsonian tradition of uniting the world of ideas and policy. This is the mission of the Wilson Center, which was established in 1968 by Act of Congress in honor of President Wilson, who was both a scholar and a politician. Now, today I'm both pleased and honored to welcome Dr. Berhnard Seliger who will deliver a refreshingly well-informed talk on current conditions in the DPRK. For those of us who make a career out of studying North Korea, Dr. Seliger really needs little introduction. But since 2002, Dr. Seliger has been the resident representative of the Hans Seidel Foundation's Seoul office, where he's overseen the North Korea Trade Capacity Project, an EU-funded project, where it makes multiple trips to North Korea to bring basic knowledge to North Korean managers, economic administrators, and academics on basic knowledge on trade. He earned his PhD in political science at the Faculty for Economics and Social Sciences at the Christian Albrechts University. The Hans Seidel Foundation is an independent German think tank located in Munich. Its main tasks are political education and research, consulting in a variety of policy fields, international cooperation and development, and they have a foundation for international contact and cooperation, which has been involved in development projects throughout the world for over 20 years, and it remains active in 55 countries today, including the DPRK. With that, Dr. Seliger, turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's a great honor for me to be here, and I hope sincerely I can live up to this Wilsonian tradition. And thanks, Mr. Person, and also Dr. Schäfer, whom I know quite some time and who is a dear colleague to me. Well, I'm not an historian. By the way, I'm also not a political scientist. We have the Dr. S.C. Poll, but that's Latin for, we call it economics anyway. But now dealing with North Korea, everything is politics. There's no economic sphere in its proper sense as we have it in other states, and we cannot really separate politics and economics, and so it might be warranted. Anyway, what I want to do is to talk a little bit about the European Union and North Korea, some facts you might know or might not, just as a background, and talk about our capacity buildings in DPRK, and talk then about three topics which I think are very important, namely, can there be a recovery without reform? That is, can North Korea become, as it strives to be, a strong and prosperous state by itself? About the actual situation on markets and currency, and the divide between Pyongyang and the provinces, and finally discuss the question, is North Korea a fragile state? I will not talk about the recent clashes, military clashes, though they are tremendously important, but I will stick with what my own experience is, or our experience, that is economic issues in their political context. So first of all, that's just a background, so to speak. Since 2001, the European Union established diplomatic relations with North Korea. All states currently without France and I think Estonia established relations in close cooperation in that time with the Kim Dae-jung government in South Korea. The EU perceived itself and was perceived also by other actors as a kind of distant powers without own interests in the region. There was no colonial history in the region, and basically also a much lower degree of political involvement or military involvement. And that gave the hope that there might be chances for political talks, maybe similar to those with China. There had been by now quite regular rounds of political talks of the so-called EU Troika, which is a representation of the Commission, the Parliament and the Presidency, so three high-ranking officials coming every half year or every year to North Korea. But human rights dialogue, which was also modeled after the example of China, broke down after only one session. The political talks, let's say, are very, very cumbersome. There had been also in 2001 a country strategy paper, which is something the European Union does for all countries. It's intending to aid with development aid. But as you all know, in 2002, the second nuclear crisis broke out, or came to the open, one should say. And so this country strategy was frozen. There was some money provided, not much, but it was around 20 or 30 million euro per year, which was intended to be spent in North Korea, but that was not spent. But the European Union stayed since 1995, so since before the beginning of diplomatic relations, they were active in humanitarian aid, and they were also active in the now defunct KEDO project. A turning point in the history from the point of view of NGOs like our organization was certainly the year 2005. After 10 years of humanitarian aid, North Korea claimed that humanitarian aid was not anymore necessary and ordered all European NGOs to leave the country. Now this is quite painful. There were not so many, but there were dozens of jobs which were endangered by this decision, and there was a lot of lobbying going on, and there was a compromise found then. The European Union would not shift from humanitarian aid to development aid. That was the original intent of North Korea. They wanted full-fledged development aid. But the European Union carried out projects, or carries out projects since 2005, which are called LRRD, meaning Linking Relief, Rehabilitation and Development. Or in other words, European NGOs carry out development projects under the disguise of humanitarian aid. It was, there was some truth in the North Korean claim. It made no sense in 2005 anymore to spend money on food aid for North Korea or so, though there were still vulnerable groups and are vulnerable groups. But the food aid, as it was necessary, let's say in the years 97, 98, in the really hardship years of famine, was not necessary anymore. On the other hand, development aid was neither politically feasible, nor was it possible under the circumstances of North Korea, because North Korea by itself, they don't want development that style. The European Union would like to have it delivered, let's say by changing the agricultural structure or changing the economic structure. So basically North Korea wanted development funds without the changes which were necessary for that. Currently we have this system that the NGOs carry out somewhat development type projects as so-called European Union project support, or EUPS. So officially, according to North Korean speak, there are no NGOs anymore in North Korea. And together with that, the personnel was severely limited of the NGOs, and also the access to the country. There is a kind of unwritten rule in North Korea, which the NGOs don't like to talk about, but which is true, that if you bring $1 million, you can add one more person per year. So that is somehow their benchmark, so to speak, for development aid. You can draw your own conclusions about the sense of this. Nevertheless, given that North Korea is so closed in relation to other countries, contacts with Europe are relatively dense. In particular with the country I come from, Germany, that has some historic reasons, because there has been a number of North Koreans who studied in the past in Germany, and there are still some decision makers who speak quite well German, and there has been some cultural exchange also, though all in all it's not, I mean it's still very minor exchange from the European point of view, but it's important for North Korea. Now, our own project started by an invitation by Kim Yong-nam in 2003, who is the official head of state, or the president of the Supreme People's Assembly, and who said that he would be glad that the German political foundations, of whom there are several, would also become active in North Korea. And what we did is to give some talk on financial institutions, and for 4 years we had this so-called EU DPRK Trade Capacity Project. Have now different other projects. We had on a limited base scholarships for North Koreans. Though the limitations came not from our side but rather from the North Korean side, it's very difficult to get out North Koreans, because they have always to come, 2 of them, and usually if they are young and we think they would be worth to study, they are not able to go out because they need something, I don't know, the German word would be Reisekarte. They need to have some approval to be able to travel out of the country, and for that they usually need to have a certain level of political ranking, plus they need to have a family which can be used to draw them back to North Korea, so it's quite complicated to get people out there. We brought books to North Korea, like also some American institutions did. We don't know who ever reads these books, but we have some precedents in Europe. The current president of Czech Republic, Václav Klaus, he started his career as a reader in economics on the decadent bourgeois economy, and he read avidly Friedrich August Hayek books, and he became so convinced by them that finally he became a staunch supporter of market liberalism. We hope something like this will happen with an unknown Korean researcher, but we are not really sure. We're not even sure if anybody can read these books. We know they arrived in certain libraries, like Kim Il-sung University, and that's all we can say. We did several seminars. This one I mentioned here because it's very interesting. North Koreans read about carbon trade, and they thought, oh, we are a country without industry, so we can sell something we don't have. And they were interested in selling their carbon rights, but we brought an expert there who told them that they need 5 years of investment, and they need a lot, enormous amount of transparency to calculate all their carbon rights, so it became less interesting for them. But these are things which are coming from the North Korean side. And we started in 2004 with a seminar on the international monetary and financial system. And this is a picture of our seminar room in the Culture Palace. And there was the seminar started. I show this because the seminar started, and I will not forget it, with a 2-hour discussion if we could move our screen for our PowerPoints in the mid of the room so that everybody could see them, but it was denied to us because the 2 persons in the back of me now, they looked down on them and they were not supposed to look down on these screens, so we had to move it to the right where not everybody could see, but anyway the picture of the 2 was not tainted. So there are a lot of practical problems also in carrying out capacity building. Now, what we found out, limited training in North Korea is certainly possible. And the focus can be twofold. Technical aspects are interested. North Korea is interested in technical aspects of agriculture, of forestry, of fishery, but also of, for example, trade or of the financial system. And they are interested where they supposed to somehow be able to benefit directly in terms of earnings from that. But they are not interested in, or let's say if there are any more far-reaching or comprehensive ideas for reform, then cooperation soon will end by the North Koreans, and even there are warnings that cooperation cannot go on. And that was the case with our seminars on the international financial system and inflation, and even more it was the case in the 4-year project we carried out later, the EU DPRK Trade Capacity Project. It was in a way a success. We did in this 3.5 years, we had 10 seminars and I guess 400 or 500 participants all in all. So it was quite interesting. We had a wide range of topics from customs issues to trade in food or trade in textile, trade in medicinal herbs like ginseng. So we really tried to show them that there is a relation to the world which can be cooperative and not hostile. But in the end, I think the project ended for the North Korean side dissatisfactory, because for all topics they found out that trade is not as they thought. We produce something and we send it overseas and we receive the earnings. But today's trade is that the trader is coming and he's looking at the factory, and if it's with food or with medicinal herbs, there are lots of regulations you have to fulfill before you can import anything to the European Union or any other place in the world. And even where they thought they have maybe a comparative advantage, like let's say in the textile sector, trade was not possible, or trade is possible, but not really like trade with countries where North Korea thought they are much less developed, let's say Cambodia or Laos. Because to Cambodia and Laos today you can send your designs, let's say, for your t-shirts or whatever you want to produce by internet, and today and tomorrow they are produced, and in North Korea it's not possible. So communication and openness were really the major hurdles for any regular trade relations with North Korea. And it was quite a disappointment, especially for the people on the ground. Let's say we had in our seminars always half or 1/3 of the people were managers, let's say, of companies of the sector. Then the rest came from the economic administration or from the academic institutions. But for these managers, earnings were a very vital and important issue, because they have tremendous pressure from above that they have to earn their money from abroad. But it was not really possible. In that sense, the project, I think, showed to the North Koreans something, but it was not successful in what the North Koreans maybe expected from it, that it would start any actual trade. So our conclusions of this project could be that we say capacity building can be only a form of appetizer for more thorough programs. One problem was also that we are not able to select our own audience there. We could say we want to have a seminar in this or that sector, and basically the audience chosen was appropriate for every topic as far as we could establish that. But to say we want really to train people in the sense as you train people in other countries, it's not possible. And one very important point for us was to show the gap between North Korea and the rest of the world, and that the gap is increasing. Let's say in the end of the Cold War in 1990, probably North Korea had not such a bad position compared to countries, let's say, like Laos or Cambodia, because its workers were relatively better educated, the infrastructure of the country was in a better shape, etc. But all this changed over time, and to the disadvantage of North Korea. And in particular, as I said, in terms of communication and openness, which should be written with 2N here, sorry. And then there's a necessity for knowledge transfer in all fields. It doesn't really matter where you start with capacity building. They need capacity building in all fields now. And for us, as Europeans, might think it naive, but we thought it's an important point that we also think of our seminars as trust building, as showing a certain group, at least in the country, that the outside world or relations to the outside world don't have to be hostile, but the outside world basically has an interest in peaceful relations with North Korea. So much maybe perhaps for the points such a program could achieve, but there are limits, and these limits are important, and they are imposed by North Korea itself. The first one is that trust building was for us important, but North Korea implicitly rejects it. And you see it in the handling of NGOs. The personnel which is attached to a certain NGO regularly is exchanged for the reason that these people get too much exposed to foreign ideas. The North Koreans don't say so much, but every half year or every year the people are changing, meaning that to establish a working relationship with them is very difficult, and that's meant to be so. It's also in smaller points in the thing, if we have a single seminar with them, we start 9 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the evening, and then we are rushed out, the Westerners, let's say the 2 or 3 persons from the West, and the audience is still sitting there, and somebody is coming and telling them something. We don't know what they tell them. If they establish the correct view of what they heard before or so, we don't really know it, but something is told them again. And there are many points like this. Also, direct communication is not really encouraged. Though we had always one thing which we did, and which was, in our point, quite successful, namely in the end of the seminar we distributed a Korean language questionnaire which the people had to fill in on the spot without any supervision, and we got sometimes quite interesting answers out of that, and as a rule we got very positive answers. Now, why is it that North Korea rejects trust building? I think one thing is that we have clearly to see that the leadership benefits from a certain level of conflict with other countries. Trade is okay as far as it can be done from a very isolated point, let's say geographically isolated, like Kaesong or maybe Rason, or isolated in the terms that they produce something and ship it abroad. But interaction is dangerous for North Korea. And that's why I also think that detent or rapprochement or whatever will not be possible for North Korea because it's risky in terms of regime survival. Any form of openness which means more interaction, for example, in the beginning of our seminars when we talked about strategies of international business or the forms of international trade, some of the North Koreans said, oh, that means we have to also to implement internet communication or something like this. And the next day, people from the foreign ministry came and said, if this kind of talk is happening in your seminars, we have to close them down. So it was there were boundaries which were quite clear. It's not an ideological problem. I didn't meet any convinced communist in North Korea, but it's a problem of leadership survival, I think. They think that their leadership will not survive if there's openness, and I think they are correct in doing so. It's tragic in a way, and if there were no South Korea, it would be maybe easier for them even. If there would be no such an example of successful capitalist development, it might be easier for them to say we can implement reforms, and the North Koreans in openness would have no place where they could all go. But as there is South Korea, the attraction is so strong of it that I think openness will lead to the demise of the regime, and the regime knows this very well. And they studied it very well in the examples they saw in Europe, especially Romania and East Germany. Now, can there be recovery without reform? That is what the North Koreans want. They want a strong and prosperous state, all by 2012. It's the usual thing when we go to North Korean countryside or industrial sites. For example, in Rason, there's a huge oil refinery for the whole country, built somewhere in the 1980s. After 3 or 4 years, it ceased to function. Nobody knows why. But definitely when we go there, they tell us next year, the leader told us we will open one which is even bigger. And that's with all the things in North Korea. Everything will change, and especially for 2012. And what makes this possible? Their technological advances, like their experimental satellite or ballistic missile, which you see here, and also their spirit of Cholima. Cholima, that is a horse which goes 1,000 leagues or 1,000 miles. And that's what they always said. And they had these 2 campaigns of 150 days and of 100 days last year, which were not successful. Surely they cannot be. I mean, people were working around the clock, but that didn't make their work effort really better, because they were just exhausted after some time if they worked on construction sites, and they were quite bored if they worked in the laboratories, as we could see it, and they didn't really believe in it, but they had to go on with this illusion. So I want to think about a little bit, where are there examples how North Korea could manage to recover, to become a strong and prosperous state by 2012 is an official policy, at least since 2008. And it's also a very strong hope of at least the previous South Korean administrations. Now I even believe the current administration wants it. And it's a hope of the South Korean middle class, because they say, let's first develop North Korea by itself, and if it's rich enough, we can unify, no problem for us. Nobody wants unification now in South Korea. And what I want to do is to take a view on existing businesses and ask the question, can they develop by themselves or maybe with the aid of China? Now this is the first one. It's a picture I took from the Chinese side of the Tumen River. It's a city in North Korea called Mooseon, and there's a large iron ore mine, which you see here on the top left place. It's said to be the third largest iron ore mine in the world. And it has been rented to a Chinese company 3 years ago for 50 years. And it's making quite important contribution to the Chinese-Korean trade. I talked to a customs official in China 2008. He said they would export more than $200 million in iron ore. And in the morning, the Chinese trucks are going in, filled with food and with clothes and everything, and in the evening they come out with the iron ore. And here you see some buildings with blue roofs. All of these buildings were restored by the Chinese already, also buildings for community use, etc. The interesting point is, it seems to be a successful example for cooperation, but for whatever reason, in the last month, for 3 times you could read that an Indian steel mogul, Mittal, visited North Korea and was in talks of taking over this mine. There was no mentioning of the current owner or renter, the Chinese company. I'm not really sure what's going on. Nobody could tell me, but it shows that even for these long-term investments made by the Chinese, there seem to be a lot of political problems, and it's quite unsure if they really, after initial investment, get out some profit from it. And you see it also from a second example. This is a hotel, what's the name? Golden Dragon Hotel, I guess, in the Rason Free Trade Area, was built around the year 2000. And the great attraction of this hotel was the annex, the round annex on the right side of the picture. That was a casino. However, the Chinese who went there for gambling didn't gamble with their own money, but usually with the money of their companies, or even more often their local communities. So they gambled so much money that in 2005 China said, you have to stop this. So the business stopped to exist. Now the hotel is there. The North Koreans say in the summer they still open for tourism, and around 10,000 Chinese would come for 1 month, but at least for 11 months a year, this hotel is empty. It's another one of these investment ruins. And if you go to Rason, you see quite a number of these places which for various reasons have been abandoned again. Another one, this is from an Egyptian company. You might have heard about that. There is an Egyptian company called Waskom, and they founded together with the North Korean telecommunication Koryolink, the provider of cell phone services. And as of March this year, they said on their website that they have more than 100,000 subscribers. That is true, I think. I know from the people we interacted with, which are, let's say, low to mid-level people in the, let's say, in the foreign ministry, they all had cell phones, and they were using them as avidly as the South Koreans do. But the question is, the one thing is, this company bought, first of all, a cement factory. they established a cell phone business, and as a third, they started to renovate the hotel you see, or this pyramid on the left side. That's the Yugong Hotel, which was supposed to be built for the World Youth Festival in 1988, but was never finished, and then for around 20 years was empty. It's a 102 story building. It's really absolutely amazing. And here you see that picture I took maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and they had just one field covered with glass there, you see on the left side. But now 2 sides of the whole building are completely covered in glass. Nobody really knows where they need this building for. So why do I show this? I want to ask, nobody really can explain me how this company ever can make a profit of their investment. They invest quite heavily there. There are very wild ideas what could be the reason to invest there, but there's no really person who can explain to me how from their limited numbers of telephone subscribers or so they can make a profit with it. I think there's something political behind it, which I cannot really explain because I don't know it, but certainly it seems to contradict normal business logic. And it's another example, Pyeonghwa Motors. Pyeonghwa Motors is a company producing, or rather assembling, cars. These cars are usually based on Fiat models, Italian models, and also on parts which are imported from Fiat. And this company was long time hailed as a kind of first capitalist venture in North Korea because they were able to put up 2 or 3 billboards. One of these, the one I have here in the photo, it's very close to the Pyongyang station. However, this, again, it has nothing to do with business. It's a venture which is funded and founded by Unification Church, better known to some people as the Moonies or the Moon sect. And the reasons might be related, like in the case of Hyundai, to some nostalgia, because Reverend Moon himself came from the north. Again, it's a business which is certainly not profit-making in the sense of normal business logic. The cars are okay, by the way. We usually have this car called Samcholi. It's a kind of small van, and for the streets of Pyongyang, they're certainly okay. But they don't sell them really. The North Koreans order them, and the money comes from businesses the Moon sect has all around the world, especially in South Korea. They're quite good in business. They are a business empire. But their investment in North Korea has nothing to do with economic development or with business investment. Now, something a little bit different, the Pyongyang Trade Fair, which exists now since 5 years or 6 years, and they have always a spring fair and an autumn fair. This was a picture from the spring fair last year. You see important companies, especially of China, coming, like Haier, which is a very large, one of the world's largest producer of electronic appliances by now. And you see North Koreans buying there. But what you basically see is there also, you have some, what I would call the Pyongyang middle and upper class, people who have the money, who buy some appliances there, and it's a kind of outlet probably for the consumption pressure coming from the Pyongyang elites, but there's nothing like business relations which you would expect from a trade fair in other countries. And last one, you might have not heard of this. 3 Swedish young guys went to North Korea and ordered jeans, trousers, I don't know, several thousand pairs of them. It was quite an adventure for them. And you can buy them now. I think they're expensive, and certainly they wouldn't fit me anyway. But again, it's a nice story, and you can read on their website about this Moko jeans several things. But it has nothing to do with business. So what I want to show with these examples, some of them, this is maybe not so serious, but the other ones, like the Waskom or the Mooseon mine, these are quite big ventures, but they are rather political ventures, not economic ones. So what I think, political investment from China cannot really transform the North Korean economy. What it can do, it can considerably prolong the life of the regime, especially under the premise that the regime doesn't really need to become rich, even that the regime might reject the way of capitalist development. Other investment is not likely to be attracted, with some either insignificant projects like these Noco jeans or some very specialized project in the raw material sector, where I heard that you can make money in dealing with North Korea if you are a shrewd trader. But that certainly doesn't mean that North Korea can do anything like a normal development out of this. Trade is increasing. That's an interesting point now. This is from Kotra data, but I stole it from a very interesting paper from the E3, recent paper by Nicolas, I think. And you see here that trade with China, this is until 2008, trade with China is increasing considerably, and trade with South Korea also. South Korea is still the second major trading partner, while trade with Japan officially completely ceased to exist. And that is, I think, very interesting for two reasons. One, it shows that trade is politically motivated. Clearly in the case of South Korea, it's almost entirely Kaesong bound trade here. And the other point you see is also that you see the natural leverage South Korea could have in dealing with North Korea, especially if you think now of the recent events. Trade is one leverage they still have left, and that means opening or closing of Kaesong. That's really one still viable option, that's policy option, which is there for North Korea. So, as I said, it's increasingly politically motivated. Here you see factory in Kaesong. One interesting story at the site is that when Kaesong was visited 2 years ago by some ambassadors in Pyongyang, they were accompanied by officials of the Ministry of Foreign Trade, and those were the ones who really got the culture shock when they visited Kaesong, because they couldn't imagine that in their own country so modern companies would exist. So it was really an eye-opener for them, as I heard. Okay, let's have a very short look on the actual economic conditions. As you know, the currency reform led to a near chaos. There were, for several weeks, the markets basically ceased to function. There were wild price fluctuations. There were problems to exchange for foreigners, and I saw a number of frustrated businessmen in Rason, businessmen coming from China who usually did their trade with North Korea there. But also what was possible, there was something like a Pyongyang is far attitude. So in Rason I know that after the first weeks of the failed currency reform, they adopted again unilaterally, so to speak, the Chinese yuan without caring for the things which happened in Pyongyang. So, and then after the 2nd of February, Pyongyang business as usual again. The question is what happened to the traders. Traders were expropriated, and that was one of the main reasons of the reform. And what I mean is not so much the trade you see maybe in the newspapers sometimes or so, like in the Tongil market in Pyongyang, but the real traders are people like these, which you see everywhere in the countryside. I apologize for the quality of the picture. It was taken from out of a car, a running car, but that's typical, a man or two men sitting with a open baggage or luggage selling whatever they have to sell, cigarettes or small stuff or so, which you find everywhere in the countryside. And usually if official cars coming, they clap down there and walk away. But these are the traders which were really hurt and which lost their working capital, so to speak. Then one point I want to draw attention to is that we sometimes still forget that there are starkly different standards of living in between Pyongyang and the countryside, and that there is something which we could call political and economic discrimination, which is until today a source of misunderstandings. I don't know, probably some of you know that there had been a recent visit of the director or head, the president of WHO to North Korea, saying that North Korea was basically a model for many other developing countries with its free and very well functioning healthcare system. That was as the director herself admitted, clearly a Pyongyang-based view, and it was, in my opinion, a quite distorted view. Because if you go to the countryside, you see how poor, underdeveloped, and deindustrialized the country is. North Korea was industrialized, also in the countryside. It was not so long ago, 20 years ago, that we had a considerable industrial employment in the countryside, but it all ceased to exist. And today we have artificially much higher employment in agriculture than would be warranted by the economic structures established in the times of more or less functioning central planning. Now, typical views of the countryside consist of this: mountains which are bare of any forests, and you see that mountains are used for on the sloping lands are used for agriculture, which is a very dangerous thing. The reason is that these land slopes, if they have a certain slope, can be used for private agriculture. It's tolerated. It's not official policy. And I have been together with North Koreans. There were people working in the fields, and I asked them, what about these fields there? And they said they don't exist. But there were people working, actually. So they're just not seeing what they don't want to see. But the danger in these fields is that the monsoon is coming, though it's not so strong in the north of Korea, but monsoon is coming, taking all the soil away, and many of the problems related to the floods and droughts in North Korea are man-made, I would say. So the situation of forestry is very serious and affecting the microclimate of the country. And affecting agricultural output. And also it's utter nonsense from an economic point of view that people who are anyway not very well nourished march up the mountains to do their to go to their fields, which are bringing less reward than the fields in the low levels, because they can retain this, what they earn there or what they harvest there, while the official fields, which are much more fruitful, are neglected. That you see, if you see, for example, how the corn is growing, the maize is growing in North Korea. You see, if the maize is growing high, it's usually around the houses where it's private, or there in the countryside where in the private slopes where they care for it, but not in the official fields. You can immediately see the differences. Typical views of the countryside: the roads are sand roads usually, besides very few motorways, which are prestige roads, so to speak. There are no bridges, which is okay in the summer, and it's even fun to go through these things, but it's not okay if it's winter time, or if it's the monsoon rain is coming. And transportation is cumbersome. And public transportation in the countryside looks like this. So we shouldn't forget that, because these are pictures you don't see if you look at the official pictures you get to see from North Korea, which are all from Pyongyang. And this is a picture, let's say, from some working effort in the sea. The workforce is really the one driver of the economy, not technology. Now, last point I want to discuss here about, is North Korea a failing state? And that's a question I ask myself a very long time. And according to this map, which is from the Failed State Index of Foreign Policy, it is a failing state. North Korea is a small red dot there, you can see. And it's even more if you look at their score in the last 3 years. On almost all social, economic, and political military indicators, according to foreign policy, North Korea is a failed state, with two notable exceptions: refugees and displaced persons, and human flight, both of which is difficult, not impossible, but difficult for North Korea. I, however, have a different view. I think if we look at the economic factors first, certainly North Korea is not a very rich country. It's a poor and underdeveloped country, but it doesn't need to be a rich country. There's a very small elite which has to be catered for, and for those, for example, these events like the Pyongyang Trade Fair in May and in autumn exist. For the other people, it's not good that they starve, really. North Korea, because there are too many dangers of uprisings or of local riots, but That's something I learned from Dr. Schäfer. I think you mentioned it once that Kim Il-sung said something to Erich Honecker like, well-fed people make bad socialists. So it's clear that the socialist spirit is growing with a certain alertness regarding the danger from abroad and regarding also the direness of the own situation. What is important is that North Korea, despite all these problems, is a functioning state. And I think as long as China does not fundamentally change its strategic view on the Korean Peninsula, a collapse is very unlikely. And China has no reason to change that view, because North Korea is sometimes a nuisance. They don't want North Korea to develop these nuclear weapons and to do these acts of warfare, like obviously now in terms of the Cheongnam. But on the other hand, two Koreas are much easier to handle than one Korea. And that is true in a number of aspects, in trade terms, in political terms, in the question of the US bases in South Korea, etc. And look at this. Where else in Asia do you find roads which are every day cleaned by the population? Pyongyang is a very, very clean city. It's also poor, but it's clean. And where else do you find this? That this is the 4th of July at night, 2 or 3 o'clock at night, the day of death of Kim Il-sung, it must be. I think 4th of July was something around this day. I don't know the exact date anymore, but we went there and it was 2 or 3 o'clock at night and there were still people coming up and delivering at this death day their flowers, and certainly they were sent by their companies sometimes, but people came also on themselves. So the state ideology, as hollow as it might be, at least on the outside, it's still working and it's still functioning. And the same is true for all these people. These people, you could see the whole last year, for months and months, practicing for some event. They all hold a candle in their hand. It's made of wood. It's just a makeup. For the real event, it will be a real candle, and the real event will be only half an hour, but they practice months and months for it. And they practice in the morning and in the evening and at night. Our ambassador went there once 3 o'clock at night, and they were still standing there and practicing, or sitting and sleeping. And these are people, usually they are students or high school students, and for months and months they are out of school. They don't need to learn something, but they need to learn to be in line. That's, by the way, certainly the reason why they do this. It's a kind of coercive effect which you get from these exercises, but the exercises exist and there's no popular resistance to them. There's no failure of the state in that sense. And the same is true then for when the events are played out, like here in the Arirang festival, where hundreds of thousands do this kind of exercises. So I think North Korea is not a failed state, and this is now the question, does it mean that it's a stable state or an unchallenged state? Personally, I don't think so, and we could think maybe that if we think of time in different dimensions, we could think of chronological time. We can say North Korea can exist another 10 years or 20 years. Certainly it will depend on how well the successor, how much time the successor has to come into his power and to establish his own generals of loyalty around him, like Kim Jong-il had these 20 or 30 years. Probably Kim Jong-un will have less time. But there might be something like, well, a time to take, or a time where there is an opportunity, a window of opportunity, or how you call it, or the how did we say, the code of history, as we said it in Germany, when suddenly a window opened and German unification was possible. I think similarly to what we learned from Eastern Europe and Germany, there might be a chance for change in Korea too. And one indicator of this is that the flows of information grew dramatically. We have now numbers of defectors in South Korea, 20,000 maybe, and we have hundreds of them who are through some channels, sometimes through telephones even, more often through brokers, able to communicate with their relatives in the north itself. That's something which didn't exist before. That's also the reason why the regime is so drastic about external propaganda. You know that one of the major grievances they have against South Korea is that South Korea is still sending the balloons with the leaflets against, or the CDs now against North Korea. And succession to Kim Jong-un will certainly be the challenge, where also the factions may arise in the open, especially if the current leader will rather die soon. Then there's also an opportunity or a danger, if you want to see it from the point of view of North Korea, for a challenge to the state. But compared to states like, let's say, Ethiopia or Somalia, North Korea belongs to a completely different category. So that's now my thesis I want to put forward here, and I'm very happy to discuss this and all other things with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have some time for, we have about 30 minutes for questions and answers. Let me first, so I forgot to, before I wanted to just point out, recognize Dr. Kim Tae-hwan from the Korea Foundation, and just note that all of the events at the Wilson Center on Korea are thanks to the generous support of the Korea Foundation, including the publication of many of the documents, some of which are available out front here. We have a document collection on the Chollima movement, which Dr. Seliger mentioned, and the first 5-year plan. So we are actually being webcast. So I ask you to wait for a microphone before you ask your question, so the folks watching us can hear the question. So with that, open up the floor.
Thank you very much for your very interesting talk.
I think it's on. Yeah, it's on.
Yes. Okay. I'm quite rather interested in the title of your talk. It is the European perspective, and it means that it implies that there is not one single universal approach to this, and you are coming from your particular location. And I guess you, including other Western experts, had lots of expertise in this kind of, development project. And my question would be, prior to this visit to North Korea, what kind of other sort of, experience you had? I mean, as a kind of preparation to, approach or go tackle this particular North Korean case. And then once I understand that beginning point, then I would be interested after this 3 months or how many months in experience, and whether you came up with a different perspective. Let's say you made often this comparison between Africa and North Korea, and sometimes it seems that you applied that there was very similarity, whether it's failed state or not. But then in the end, you ended with a sentence that one thing you learned was that North Korea was not Africa. So it's not very clear for me. I mean, how you would kind of categorize North Korea in this overall global complex of this development and European perspective.
Should I directly answer? Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, for us, the European perspective has, I think, a different meaning. One meaning is that as Europeans, we somehow, you might say it's deplorable or it's good, but for somehow we have to care less for the political implications of all this. That is, we are not directly members to the six-party talks. Actually, nobody wants us to be members. The European Union in the beginning had some idea maybe they could be something like an honest broker. Not the European Union, I should say. There were some European politicians who put forward this idea, but it was quite clearly rejected by everybody. And so that means we are not participating so directly, so we can focus on other fields which are also important in this second track or so. And more concretely now, what our development experiences concern, I cannot really talk for all Europeans, only for our foundation. We do development work in all areas of the world. We have offices in 30 countries and projects in more than 100 countries. I wouldn't say that we really can. I mean, the one field where I think we can learn a lot from, that's really China. And we have from our foundation projects in China since 25 years in the field of vocational training, and that's what we also offered the North Koreans, and we have some limited success, I would say, quite limited, unfortunately, but it's going on, our training there, and the reason is that China is the most easy. Still, with all the difficulties, it's the most easy example to emulate for North Korea, and the most, the one which has a little chance, at least, to be accepted by the North Koreans, with all the carefulness with North Korea approaches them. Now, what we learned, well, what I said, the important point is to see that we have to distinguish here between the dire economic situation and the plight of the people, if you want to say it a little more emotional, and the stability of the regime. Because you can easily, and that's maybe something where it's really different from countries in Africa or other countries where you have these pictures of people starving, and at the same time you have a political chaos, or you have a situation where the normal functions of the state don't work anymore, where the army doesn't work and the police doesn't work, etc. But ask the North Koreans, everything works well in North Korea in terms of regime survival, and everything works very difficult in terms of economic development. So that is something which we have to accept. We cannot treat North Korea like another failed state, like the foreign policy index suggests us to do. Because if it would be really true that a police state plus starving leads to dissolution of the state, it should have happened 20 years ago, but it didn't do, for some reason, because the state was working quite well. Not in any terms that it should be positive, but just to constate, it works, it's going on to work. But I seem not to have convinced you with my answer, so sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
You just mentioned that in West Africa, in Africa, for example, there was all these people starving, and then there was no strong centralized state. But if you think that way, a lot of regimes, even in Africa, maintain stability because of Western foreign policy. They kind of boost up this very unpopular regime, and so there is regime stability in spite of, right? So your sort of comparison doesn't convince me.
Yeah, no, it's not only for North Korea. It's clear that we have to, let's say, make a distinction between economic development or economic conditions and political conditions.
Thank you for your very interesting stories. I really do hope that Kim Jong-il will not visit Yanggakdo Hotel this time, because last time when he visited the Yugyeong Hotel, 105-story, last time when he visited Yanggakdo Hotel, when it was covered with glasses, it was like a sauna, and he ordered, those guys to pull them down. So I hope it won't happen this time. My question is there any difference on what you feel inside North Korea and when you come out, North Korea, and is there any difference what you feel or what you think about North Korea?
Well, yeah, certainly. if you go to North Korea, I mean, being there, it's first of all overwhelming, especially if you go to Pyongyang now. Countryside is very, very different, as I said. In the countryside, it's much more difficult for Korea to maintain this picture of an orderly development, etc. But Pyongyang is well functioning. It's also well functioning in terms, by the way, how we are treated. Basically, once they decided they want to hold a seminar, it's easier to work with the North Koreans than with the South Koreans, I would say. They don't have it that we have all these last-minute changes or so. Basically, things are working. But then they are also not working. For example, you sit in the dark. That happens not in South Korea, but only in North Korea, because electricity breaks down again. In terms of feeling, I wouldn't say, I mean, still for me, I have to admit, I hope North Koreans don't listen, but still, I'm happy to go in. I'm excited to do our program there, but I'm still happy to go out after a week. I wouldn't care much to stay there for a longer time, and I know people who stay there for a longer time. I think it's quite a hardship.
I'm going to ask a quick question, if I might. I want to ask you how you would answer a question that I'm often asked, and that's about 2012 and this slogan about becoming a strong or this pledge to become a strong and prosperous nation by then. How does the regime explain to the people if they don't succeed? I always suggest that, well, success is rather, or what constitutes a success is rather subjective. Look at the example of the Cholima tractor. I think when it was first launched during the Cholima movement, you have this tractor that's the government could not afford to buy enough tractors for the people, so they import a couple from Eastern Europe. Through reverse engineering, they build their own tractor. People from the surrounding community comes out to the factory. Reportedly, Kim Il-sung was even there. They wheel out the tractor, start it up, put it into gear, and it goes in reverse. And when it goes in reverse for about 5 minutes, then conks out. They worked out the bugs, and but it was hailed as a success, as a great success. So again, what constitutes a success in North Korea is rather subjective. How would you answer that question, though? How is the regime going to explain to the people?
First of all, I don't think they need so much of explaining, because the people don't believe in it. They already know. That's my firm idea about the North Koreans, so I cannot prove it scientifically, but I think every North Korean has two thoughts. One is the official face he puts on, and which it's really indistinguishable from his normal being, but everyone has also his private thoughts, and they know that propaganda is propaganda. And then, as you said already, the success is in the eye of the beholder. For example, recently Kim Jong-il reopened the Wiener Lohn factory, Wiener Lohn being some kind of very strange, some kind of artificial clothing stuff only made in North Korea, and they opened it 40 years ago or so, and it was one of the big inventions of North Korea. And now this last month or so they reopened it, and it was again like opening a new factory, and it was again all the enthusiastic reports. They can open many factories which don't work yet, and they will work again for some years, and then they will close down again. That can happen all over again. So in that sense, they don't really need a lot. Plus they have some real achievements in terms of house building, which is obviously done with Chinese help and Chinese building materials, for what reasons soever, and they will erect some new monuments probably, and that will. I mean, if you think that the monument to the party, which is this hammer and circle, and what's the third one? To paint brush. That was built in 93 to 95, so in the time of the famine. I mean, it's unbelievable, but it's one of the great achievements you certainly will see on a Pyongyang tour, and people will be very proud to tell you that people sacrificed a lot for that. Though they won't tell you that people starved to that time, 1,000 starved maybe at that time.
There's a question in the back.
You mentioned that some of the companies investing in North Korea is not economically or financially making any success, and rather political reasons. They are survivors and rather political, you assume. But it's North Korea is hosting the Pyongyang International Fair spring and autumn, and many European countries, as I understand, many European countries are participating. And are they actually investing in North Korea? Why are they going, Pyongyang International Trade Fair, and how many of them, and who are they? And why are they keep on hosting the international fair if they are not doing business?
Well, as I said, I think there are various questions. The one thing is there are very, very few European companies going to that fair. Basically, there is one or two transportation companies, one of them being DHL, and I think they make business in North Korea, and they have a business to do. For example, transporting the artworks with the South Koreans or the Chinese buy or so. They do some legitimate business if you want so, and they can make a profit there. There are a few companies where you really don't know why they are going. I guess there are some people going for adventurism. Last time when I was there was somebody who said he wanted to open a cafe with a Viennese cafe, an Austrian, and he had some samples. It was quite popular. He had some samples there. I don't think the cafe opened yet. It should be near one of the bridges at the Taedonggang. Pyongyang I'm a great fan of Pyongyang. I wouldn't believe it, but it has a lot of beauties which Seoul does not have, and development possibilities, let's say. But I think the cafe is not there yet, and I think that is just like these no-co jeans or so. This is not really serious investment in terms of the whole economy. It's nice to happen, but there are no larger companies, with one exception. As I said, I occasionally meet people who do trading in raw materials. I don't know anything about it. It must be very risky. I think there can be a lot of profit in. I know there's some more orderly business there, like there's a talcum mine, which is maybe a German investment, and there's also a Finnish investment in tungsten or something. I don't know really about these things. There might be some profit to be made, but let's say for an investment, let's say like Siemens or ABB or any other multinational or so doing some investment, that's simply not possible. And why not? I will tell you one reason. When we go to Rason, in Rason there is a hospital which has been supported by the Catholic Church. And there has a back history of that because the Benedictine order has been until 1950 in North Korea, and maybe 10 or 15 years ago, now they are in South Korea, in Wagwan, they said we want to support the North. So they supported this Catholic so-called International Catholic Hospital in Rason. This is written in big letters there. There's nothing Catholic besides these letters and the money they send. But the interesting thing is, when I talk to the representatives of Rason, they always said, this is our German investment, or our investment because it's from the German Catholic Church, it was arranged. And they don't see the difference between investment and donation. And with other factors also, they say, we invite investment in renewable energies. So I asked him, so what happens? Somebody comes and puts on windmills or something. How will he make a profit? They don't really understand the question because they don't know these concepts, or they ignore these concepts of profit making. For them, the same with this Pyeongsu Pharmacy, which is one company which to some extent works well in North Korea. They make generic pharmaceuticals like Pyeongsu Spirin from aspirin and something like that. And the first time when they did, the manager of that factory told us, well, the North Koreans health ministry just ordered us to deliver so and so many of these Pyeongsu Spirin for the hospitals. And he asked, so what will you give us for that? What will you pay? What price? And they didn't understand the question because they were not aware that they had to pay a price for something they ordered. So then it's very difficult to talk about business. Why they do the fair? As I said, one reason might be that there must be some outlet for the consumer pressure. Well, when we were there, one of our minders was ordered by his wife. He had to buy this and this carpet. It was not expensive, 10 euro or 20 euro, but we had twice to go there to get it, certainly. So there is consumer pressure in the elite, certainly. And they see in their videos or whatever they get from outside how other people live. And that's also a sign of change, by the way. So there must be some outlet for this for the middle or higher classes of Pyongyang. That's my guess. That's one function of these fairs.
So, Over this way. Over here, Nick.
I have a two-part question. One of the things I was surprised you did not mention was the amount of money that goes into the defense complex. There, it draws tremendous resources and contributes nothing back to the society. And so how are they going to get over that impediment if they're ever going to reform? And then the second question was, with the recent flap over the currency business, I think it was surprising, number one, that people rebelled against that, but I think more surprising was that the regime had to admit it made a mistake and backed off. Could you comment on both those, please?
Well, the first one, I disagree with you. I think, first of all, money doesn't go to the defense sector itself. We have, of these many hundred thousands of soldiers we have, the largest part are poor peasants in uniforms, I would call, who have more or less to care for themselves, which is one reason why they do resort very often to stealing from the farms. And then we have the elite troops, and I think money in them is very well invested by the regime, and the returns are not bad. If you think North Korea didn't have nuclear bombs, would it still be treated like it is by the US or by South Korea? I don't think it say this to defend these weapons, but now in terms of the regime logic, if you think of survival of the regime, nuclear bombs are a very clever thing to do. They are much cheaper than maintaining a good, well-functioning, large, conventional army, and they do their job very well, and they did their job very well to coerce as much of aid and incentives and carrots from either from Japan or from South Korea or from China or from the US all the way around, and then they try it again. I don't know if they can try it another round now. Everybody said they don't pay anymore, but I'm not really convinced. I mean, that Kaesong is still going on, and still every week a ship from North Korea brings seafood to South Korea and does trade there. So I think the money is not so bad invested there. Now, from the internal logic of the regime, they get something back, and they don't want economic development at large, but they want a certain living standard for a rather minor group of the population. If you see it like this, it might make sense. Second question about the currency reform. I mean, they did what they did in the famine time also. They found somebody who is guilty for it, and they removed him, probably terminated him from all what we know now. And certainly it was not a good strategy. And there was a lot of rumors and it seems to be going on from what you hear from defectors also in Seoul now, that situation had some repercussions, but basically the strategy was the same. They singled out some person and said he's the one who did wrong. If it would have been good, probably it would have been. If it would have worked, it would have been the work of the young general. But now it was the work of this one poor financial official, and he was the one who was made guilty for it. And the situation was reversed, and then that's the thing. The North Korean leaders, they are not ideological in any way. I mean, they are purely seeing this whole economy also from a practical point of view, and in that sense, they don't really care if it's a market economy or a socialist economy or a broken down centrally planned economy as it was most of the last years, but simply they want to see an economy which provides them with their necessary standard of living and which holds the whole population in check. And in that sense then, to expropriate the traders and take away their means of becoming more politically independent, maybe even succeeded. Though they had to apologize and to reverse it, but what they didn't reverse was the expropriation of the traders. And that was probably, in that sense, again, good for them, that they could say the possible political implications of greater purchasing power by the traders was taken away.
Right here, and then we'll go on.
Thank you for your presentation. You talk about in the seminar you used the China's model to teach them, and I really want to interested to know what's the North Korean people's reaction to the China's model. On the one hand, if they know all the side, the consequence of the China model. On the one hand, China have very successful economic GDP development. On the other hand, also have some kind of negative consequence in terms of environment pollution, and also the Chinese ordinary people were recently a lot of survey talk about they feel they have more money but less happiness, and also they feel high price of the education, health, and the housing, and especially they feel very negative for the corruption happened in the government, and also even for the ordinary people level, the level they feel the loss of innocence. All this kind of whole picture is North Korean people know, and what's their comment, if they know all this information, what's their reaction, and how they think that they like the China model or not.
Well, first of all, I have no chance to establish what the people think because we are not allowed to communicate with the people. We communicate with selected officials, always in pairs usually. That's very important to see. One observation is that they know quite well about different models, and I think they know very well that the Chinese model is much more successful than theirs, but that the South Korean and Japanese is even much more successful. You see it, for example, in terms of quality of goods, where they have a very strong idea that Chinese goods are much less quality goods than Japanese or South Korean. The second point is, there is a pollution in China, but what about this? When the Chinese people, when the Chinese farms have to kill animals because of animal disease and throw them into the Tumen River, who picks them out and eats them? That is the North Koreans. I mean, on their level of, and that's a story which actually happened. And there are many other stories. When did the Tumen River get black over and over again in the 1990s because there were leaks in the North Korean mines? I mean, North Korea is one of the countries with one of the worst environmental state in the world. I showed you this picture of the forest, and this is everywhere. Besides some prestige or state forests like Mooseon or so, everywhere where you come, where there are people, you see the forests are cut down and devastated, with the exception of the very northern part where there are not so many people living, where you have still some more or less pristine forests. And simply when you are striving for survival, you don't care so much about the potential unhappiness through more wealth. But it's true, we know it also from our own country. The Europeans are good in complaining on a high level of living standard. I mean, we know wealth doesn't buy happiness, but poverty also doesn't buy happiness. So I think they would be quite happy to be a little less happy and pure and a little more wealthy. But it's a good point actually you raised about the pureness of the race, because and we have some people who established this quite well, like Brian Myers, that after 2000 the North Korean propaganda changed that way, that they didn't say anymore you have the long lines of unemployed in South Korea and all the South Koreans are destitute, but they now say, well, they are rich, but we have still the poverty of the pureness of the Korean race, and we are not tainted by racialism and by all the bad influences which came through, sorry to say, through the Americans mainly, to the South Korean society. Well.
Do you know anything about why the China National Statistical Bureau stopped releasing the data on China and North Korea bilateral trade? From around October 2009, there used to be a separate line for North Korea, and now it seems that it's categorized under other Asia. And if I can briefly ask a second question about your thoughts on the implications of North Korea's participation in the Shanghai Expo this year.
Well, it's very specialized, and I'm sorry I cannot answer to your... I heard about that also, and one explanation I heard about that was that it might be related to the sanctions, and that China does want somehow to escape criticism on its increased trade with North Korea. But I don't really know more about that. I'm really very sorry. I heard about that too, but no explanation. And about the Shanghai exposition, I mean, that they participate, it's not so spectacular, I would say. I know from other international events, usually when they are hosted by China, North Korea is quite regular. I know, for example, we ourselves are involved in a so-called International Conference of Asian Political Parties. And when it was hosted 2006 by China, we had the largest North Korean delegation they ever sent to this event. So they feel still quite close in that sense to China. As for the design of the Expo pavilion they have, I heard it's similar to that of the South Koreans in the 1970s, but I don't know about that. And basically my private opinion is let them do their exposition. I mean, the more they themselves are exposed, if there are 10 North Koreans or 100 North Koreans traveling to Shanghai and seeing how a modern city looks like in the brightness of night, that's probably not bad for them. I mean, I wouldn't see any problems with that. But that's my personal opinion.
I think we'll take a question here and then in the back.
Thank you so much for your frankness. I guess I'm wondering, in light of all the obstacles that your foundation has faced in terms of training, scholarships, having dialogues, what conclusions have you reached about your future agenda? What strategies do you think might work? You seem to be fairly pessimistic about the possibilities of continuing to engage with the North Koreans.
That's an interesting question. I hope strongly that next Monday I will be in North Korea again, in Rason, where we have this project going on now. We offer them training and knowledge transfer. And we know that to some extent they are interested in it. We have not a hidden agenda, though the North Koreans sometimes accuse us of it. We hope that there are beneficial side effects, one being trust building, the other being more openness, also leading to another view on the world, and maybe also to another view on how North Korea can do its own business, so to speak. If this is successful, I don't know. I also know that it might be dangerous, so to speak, to talk about it here, even if it's webcasted, though not many North Koreans fortunately have web access. But on the other hand, I also think it's not necessary to talk about that. We don't have anything to hide. We want to help them in a way. Though we know that it's limited, and I hope we can get a balance between both the wish to do something for development and or for opening, and also the realistic view on the country. Because if you lose that, I mean, I know many attempts of trying to aid North Korea, which I think have even worsened the situation. Not the least, unfortunately, from the country I'm now residing in. Under some administration. So I think really to help them is good, but there must be also some realism with the aid.
I guess my question is in a sense similar to the gentleman's question. I agree with you in that South Koreans want North Korea to prosper for a couple of different reasons. I think we want them to prosper because they're our brother countries. So emotionally, we want to live in a better condition. But for a practical reason, we want them to less burdensome on South Korean economy when we finally reunite. So we have provided them with enormous amount of economic aid, financial aid for the past 10 or so years through the so-called sunshine policy. But what we see these days as a result of that help is really disappointing. I mean, a lot of the general sense among South Korean population is that we were betrayed and we were abused. And you also mentioned that foreign investment would not really change the regime. But do you think South Koreans still need to help them financially, economically, and if we need to do that, do you think if there's any better way to do that so that the country could change?
I mean, foreign investment will certainly change North Korea. I just say under the current rules, there will be not the right foreign investment, meaning foreign investment based on economic calculation. Though we have it from China coming, because the Chinese have their special relation, but I think you need a firm framework, which internationally it's quite clear which this should include, among them certain property rights, for investment to happen. If not, you will get distorted investment. And you have the South Korean investment in Kaesong, it's political investment. For the companies, it makes sense because they have almost 100% political backing there. But they wouldn't invest there if the risk were their own risk. That's very important to see. And that's why I think large-scale investment simply will not happen. If it would happen, it would be perfect, naturally. But that needs some change of framework. And it's better to say it to North Korea. I mean, the North Koreans live under some illusion because they were so successful with their strategies until now with a mixture of threats and invitations for special relations regarding China or regarding South Korea to invite them to do these projects. But they are not the projects which will be helpful, I guess. And I mean, the way we prefer is that knowledge transfer or training, that are for us keywords for any society, I think, to open, to learn from each other. I know it's a very difficult thing, and certainly if North Korea doesn't want it, we cannot do it. We can only offer it. But that's, I think, the way which would really lead to sustainable change.
Very good. Thank you.
Maybe one more thing which came in my mind about the South Korean investment, which I basically also find not bad. But one typical example, in 2008 we visited the Central Tree Nursery in North Korea because we are involved in some forest projects there. They were very proud because they had very large solar collectors which they just got from South Korea, and they said all our facilities now autark and we can produce our own electricity. 1 year later we came in May 2009 and all the solar collectors were in disorder and not arranged anymore. Yeah, some spare parts were missing and there was no possibility in that time due to political reasons to get an expert from the south there. So the solar collectors didn't work. And it was many projects I know from agriculture and other fields where we got some glimpse inside that it simply doesn't work. And the North Koreans always say we need the best technology, but they don't need it. They need a technology which they can handle, which is very difficult. And that's where we often have this mismatch. And I think the mismatch is the bigger, the less supervised or the more political are the projects. And the North-South Korean projects were maybe among the most political and the least supervised or monitored projects. So there the mismatch happened very often.
Great. Well, thank you. One more question.
So you just mentioned the South Korean, North Korean project is not is the most mismatched. But what about Germany? Why is Germany helping North Korea with this knowledge and knowledge transfer? What would be the benefit or goal of Germany engaging North Korea?
Well, I hope not to sound too pathetic here, but it's true that we got help when we were in a very difficult situation after 1945, and in the 60s, somehow when Germany became rich again, the West, we decided to give something back. The whole concept of our political foundations, for example, is borrowed from the Americans. And the North Koreans themselves, they often ask themselves, why do you want to do that? I mean, there must be some reason for that. You must have some interest. But that's maybe the European naivety or something that we think to do something good then would be good for itself. And certainly in a more broad way also a stable Northeast Asia would benefit us as trading partners of some countries like South Korea. But there's no other agenda behind it. So it's really just this.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Seliger. And I hope you'll join me now in